Hello, everyone. What I wanted to talk about this week is storytelling. Photographers are visual storytellers. We're capturing moments in somebody's life. So let's use weddings as an example because people are familiar with weddings. You can go see a lot of different wedding photographer sites and see how they tell the story. Some are more artistic, shall we say, than others. For example, I remember seeing one that it was a bunch of flowers, all right? They changed it to black and white with just the color of the roses being left in. And in the background, blurred, were the couple. Now, that's an interesting artistic photograph. And it tells a particular type of story about the accoutrements of the event. But let's look at the wedding itself. Now, if you look at the way a lot of the photographers handle weddings, and you can see it on their sites, the entire wedding stays in focus, right? They take the bride and groom, they may put them in an archway or with something interesting around them and separate them from the group physically and take photographs of them. But what if, now obviously you don't want to do this during the wedding ceremony itself because you would be in the way. But what if before they left, you swapped places with the minister and took a picture just of them with the background of all of their guests, but made it so that everybody was blurred out except for the couple? That would immediately make them the center of attention and give you something to focus on. Now, the reason I'm using this example is I've noticed that a lot of the photography done, and I've done it myself when I do events, everything is in focus. Now, sometimes there's a really good reason for that. For example, if I'm shooting an event and I want to make sure that I get the crowd that's watching the event, everything has to be in focus. I can't focus in on anything in particular usually. If I have someone who looks particularly interested or on the edge of their seat, shall we say, for the event, having them in focus and letting everything else drop off would be an awesome photograph. Thinking it from a battle perspective, because you guys know I shoot at Fort Ticonderoga and do the reenactments, shooting a particularly intense reenactor with everything else falling in out of focus around them is a particular way of telling a story through the eyes of one participant. The same thing could be done for a wedding, for example. The problem with a wedding, as with some events, is there's certain areas you just can't get to. But using one of the longer zoom lenses, you may be able to find a place that you can hide. You're out of the way, so you won't be interfering with anything, and you don't draw attention to yourself. But you can get a picture of maybe the bride's parents as they watch the wedding take place. Again, just them in focus, let everything else fall out around them. Or the groom's parents. Or can you be around the other side and just get a picture of the bridesmaids or the groomsmen? Some of this is going to require there to be more than one photographer. But this is really good example of using zoom lenses to get out of the action. You've heard me talk about using zoom lenses when it comes to doing the Revolutionary War reenactments because there's a safety zone. And I try to stay on the side of the safety zone that everybody stays on. Out of the way, but again, it's a safety zone. They want you to be able to see the action going on, but they don't want you to have the possibility of getting hurt during that. So what I've done is used a zoom lens to compensate for that. Now I've got a 70 to 200 millimeter. Now 200 isn't that much of a zoom, depending on how far away you are from things, but it's a 2.8. There's apparently a 300 that's coming out that's a single 300. This starts to get into having to have two cameras or having two shooters and things, but putting that aside, you can put some of that, allay some of that by making sure that you plan out where you're going to be and what the flow is going to look like of an event. Weddings are pretty straightforward. They kind of always work the same way. But when it comes to reenactments and other events where they're doing some sort of living history, you're going to have to figure out where everything's going to be. And then, of course, if you're shooting sports, that gets even more complicated. So let's take a sports example. Let's say you're shooting soccer. You may not know where you're going to be, but being able to grab that person who's got the ball and have them in focus and let everything else fall away is going to make an awesome shot. 90% of the people taking the photographs are probably spectators or people that need to get the entire thing in focus. But if you want to have an extraordinary photograph, having that one person in focus, especially if they're surrounded by a bunch of people, but just letting them fall out of focus allows you to put the spotlight on them without having to have special lighting. It allows you to bring everyone's attention to that particular person in that particular moment. So as I said last time about renting equipment, this is where equipment rentals can allow you to get an extraordinary photograph that you may not be able to get with the equipment you've got, without spending the thousands and thousands of dollars necessary to get the other gear. There's a lens that I would love to use. It's about $10,000. Rental for 7 days is just under $400. And of course, if you're renting, make sure you get the insurance because stuff happens that's out of your control and you don't want to have to pay the price of the lens, obviously. But when you've got this equipment, think of all the possibilities that you could do different than what you normally do. Now, maybe you just want to get a lens like that and say, for a day or two, just to get a feel for it, set yourself a day that you're going to go shoot something. Maybe it's a high school sporting event. Something you can get a feel for what the lens can do for you before you do the quote-unquote real event. But try out some of the stuff. Rentals allow you to try out a bunch of different things to let you find your voice as a photographer. What is it that you want to be known for? What type of photography do you want to be known for? And go out there and get those photographs. Play around with the different options available to you. And again, you don't have to buy this stuff. Unless it's something you're going to consistently do, you don't have to buy it. You can just go rent it. And that includes for things like weddings. There are wedding kits that have different lenses and things that you can rent. But if it's something that you are going to consistently do, then you probably want to have that lens. And if you're shooting something like a wedding, you have some time that you can swap out your lenses, right? As the bride's walking down the aisle, you can get those shots of her coming down the aisle. But before she comes down the aisle, you can get the bridesmaids, you can get the groomsmen, you can get the groom, you can get the minister. You can get those other shots because you have time. But when you're shooting something more live action, for example, a sporting event, you may want to have more than one kit. You may want to have a secondary camera with another lens on it. And of course, you can rent this stuff. If you don't have a second shooter, then this gives you the opportunity to take some pictures by just swapping from one camera to the next. I've got a dual strap rig here. I just gave away my backup camera. It was an older camera and I want to get it replaced anyway, but I have a dual strap setup that allows me to carry two cameras around my neck, and I can easily just put one aside and grab the other one, so I can use a camera and another lens quickly for an action event. I've used that in the past. This year, again, as I tell people to experiment, I'm going to try to lay out where I want to be, keeping in mind that I have a crowd that I have to deal with. So I may not be exactly where I want to be all the time, but by laying out where I can be to get the photographs that I want, I can plan out what lens to have at different times and schedule in when I have the opportunity to swap the lenses out. For example, when they do a reenactment and they're moving from area to area, there may be a time where they stop and do a little bit of setup. This is what would happen in a normal battle. If you're trying to get away from an opponent, you're going to be less organized, let's say, than when you get to a spot that you think you can defend yourself again, at which point you're going to reorganize yourselves. Same with a sporting event. If you watch soccer, sometimes the ball will go flying down the field. Sometimes that's not going to work out best for the team. So once the team gets it into their opponent's territory, they'll slow down. They'll start to pass it back and forth. They'll start to regroup as a team to carry that ball to the goal. So as they're passing the ball back and forth and getting ready to kick that goal shot, there'll be a time where they regroup. And that might be a time that you can swap out a lens. Although in that case, it's probably not as much time as some of the other events will have when there's a break in the action like that, or a slowing down in the action. So the other thing to keep in mind is what you're going to be shooting. Will there be those gaps? Will there be those opportunities to allow you to take the time to swap out lenses? Or does it make more sense for that event to go get another camera and put another lens on it so that you can swap between a really wide angle and a more zoomed in thing? And again, what do you want to shoot? What types of photography do you want to be known for? What do you want your voice to be? The only way to know that is to experiment. And the easiest way to experiment, the least expensive way to experiment, is to rent equipment that you need. So get out there, find your voice, find out what it is that you want to see in your photographs. A lot of people will shoot what they think is popular. They'll go from site to site and say, well, this photographer always does it this way. But that doesn't set you apart from everybody else. That just makes you the same as everybody else. Photographers have an artistic, creative energy and view of the world. You have your own unique view. And the only way you're going to find that is to get out there and try. Shoot different events. Shoot kids' sports if you want to be a sports photographer, just to see what that looks like. If you've got a college near you, there may be some college sport events that you can get into, that you can get to places where you may not be able to get into for a professional event, for example. So before you end up shooting a professional baseball team, for example, if you want to do that, shoot some of the college leagues. See if you can shoot some of the A-team, the minor league type of games, where again you may have a easier way to get to different spots on the field than you would during a professional one, where you have to have passes and you're limited as to where you can be. But find your voice. Practice, learn, and grow. And that's what I got for you guys this week, and I will talk to you all next week.